These unconventional times require unconventional conversations. Listen in as your host, Richard Gordon, engages in one-on-one conversations with numerous leaders, elected officials, politicians, and others to learn what's happening in your state, on the Hill, and across America. Now, here's the host of Unconventional Times, Richard Gordon.
Hello, this is Richard Gordon, your host for Unconventional Times. Thank you for joining us again. It's good to have you with us. Today we have a really exciting show with Colorado's 39th Secretary of State, Jena Griswold. I'm proud to say that Jen's been a friend of mine for a very long time, and so I'm really thrilled to have her on the show. Jenna, Madam Secretary, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Let's just start with the job. I mean, when you talk to people about Secretary of State, most people think of international affairs and diplomacy and those type of things. Most people don't understand what a state Secretary of State does. Could you tell us? Because I don't think our listeners know.
Sure, but I do think folks know a lot more now what Secretary of State was before the Trump times. Prior to Donald Trump, people may have thought we were out negotiating foreign treaties like the U.S. Secretary of State. That's not the state secretaries of state. Most of us oversee elections. Every state has their Secretary of State slightly different if they have a Secretary of State. But here in Colorado, I'm one of the 4 statewide constitutional officers, and I'm responsible for being the chief election officer for the state, maintaining the state's business registry, and a whole host of other things like registration of charity, making sure there's not charity fraud. I am, believe it or not, the protector of the state seal. So I used to say during my first run for office that I would bring together a SEAL team to protect the state seal. No one thought it was funny, so I stopped saying it. Oh, I also, you laughed very quietly. I also oversee bingo, money in politics, but the big 2 things that folks really think about are elections and making sure it's easy and seamless to register a business in the state of Colorado.
You brought up a lot of things in there, and we're going to try to unpack that during this conversation, talk about a whole bunch of those. The state seal thing did make me laugh, because a friend of mine was Secretary of State many, many years ago, and we used to tease him, like, what type of fish does he does he give the seal? But be that as it may. Okay, so we're even, one joke each. Why do you think the job has changed? Why do you think it has let's be honest, in days gone by, it was really much more about registering businesses and the seal and that type of stuff. Why do you think the job has changed, has become so out front? I mean, look, you're on TV all the time. I see you, luckily, I get to see you all the time on TV because the job has changed, the role has changed. Why do you think?
Donald Trump. That's the simple answer.
Explain.
He has mainstreamed and made acceptable a major attack on our elections and in confidence in our elections. And it has opened up the floodgates to a lot of very negative consequences. So there's a whole group of Democratic secretaries of state who started to become better known in 2020 because we were literally standing up to then President Trump trying to steal the presidency from the American people. And not to take us too far back into the past, like lying about coronavirus victim numbers, just lying nonstop about our elections, creating a chaotic environment to undermine people's faith and confidence, which ended up culminating in the January 6th insurrection. So there are a few of us, or a handful of us, who were standing up to the lies, telling the truth, protecting our election systems, protecting our voters' inherent right to vote, and shining light onto the major issue that was brewing. And that's what really brought the seat to prominence.
You raised a lot of issues about voting. Voting is sacred in America. That is a sacred thing we get to do. And people like to feel that their vote really matters. And we all understand we're one of many millions of people to vote, but we still feel that our vote is important. I guess the big question I need to ask you Are our ballots safe? Is our vote safe? Are we safe from both foreign interference and domestic interference?
Yes, the electoral process is safe and secure. 2020 was actually the safest election in American history, and our security measures have only increased. We've seen major innovations, and not to just boast about the state, but Colorado has led the way on many of the reforms. But your question, I think, can be interpreted in two ways. Is your ballot, when you cast it, safe? The answer to that is absolutely yes. Is your ballot safe when candidates believe that they can contest results for no reason, that they can try to steal elections from the American people, that they can gerrymander out people that they don't like? The answer to that question is no.
Hmm.
The big problem with election denialism, with the far right trying to steal elections, is it's stealing our voices, it's stealing our decisions, or attempting to, as American citizens. It degrades the idea that American people get to choose their elected representatives. So yes, ballots cast are absolutely safe, but it is a danger to see Trumpism in its full effect and its effect on American elections and democracy.
So why are people, look, when you look at lawsuits brought about election fraud, they're very, very, very few. And frankly,
Mm-hmm.
I may be wrong about this, but from what I can tell, most of the people who are convicted happen to be Republicans. I just look at cases across the country. That seems to be the way it is. Why is it that we have so little election fraud, but so much noise about it?
To push disinformation, right? So American elections are incredibly secure. Colorado elections are incredibly secure. So in Colorado, we vote on a piece of paper. Piece of paper can't be hacked.
Hmm.
We have multi layers of security to ensure that the voting equipment is safe and secure. We have strict chain of custody, bipartisan election judges, signature verification. Every time you vote a mail ballot, your signature is checked. People are background checked who are working. We partner with military and law enforcement to build against cyber attacks, partner with the National Guard. The list goes on and on and on and on. And so the question becomes, to your point and your question, when there are so little real issues about double voting or voter fraud, why is it all that the far right can talk about? And the answer is, it's not about reality, it's about the distortion they're trying to create. Because when enough Americans believe the lies about our electoral process, that itself is powerful. The misinformation, the election lies have been used to justify voter suppression laws passed since 2020 and before across this country. The lies have been used to incite violence against election workers and get good Republicans and Democrats to step down. The lies have actually been used to incite threats to the actual election infrastructure through insider threats. So the whole point is to create chaos so that the next time a candidate who loses tries to claim victory, there will be more people who actually believe something was wrong with the election when nothing actually was wrong. The point is chaos. And that's why we have all the lies continue from the far right and continue, by the way, through the next administration that we're about to see. House Republicans are continuing to talk about things that are not common to the administration of elections, and they focus on these issues to try to scare folks and to spread lies.
How do you beat that? How do you fight against that? I mean, look, if people continually talk like this, what's going to end up happening is people will stop voting. They'll feel their vote doesn't count. It doesn't matter. It's not real anymore. It's, quote, fake news. So why bother to vote? How does someone like you in your position, how do you fight against that?
That's a great question. And what we have seen, not being a political commentator, but just from my own perceptions and takeaways, is that lies about our elections can really backfire. They can. We saw
Hmm.
them backfire in 2018 for the far right, in 2020, in 2022. And I do think they have the ability to be really corrosive, but they don't always work as they should. From an administration point of view, the lies have been really hard. Look, in the state of Colorado, since 2020, we had a 38% turnover of county clerks. Those are the
Wow.
local administrators that run the elections at the county level.
Have they quit because it's just so unpleasant and the public makes it so difficult? I mean, why are they leaving?
In a large part, the vitriol.
Yeah.
And to contextualize it, just speaking for myself, 4 men have been found guilty and faced jail time for threatening my life. I had, in just the last year, 1,800 death threats or violent threats because of Trump's lies. And so it gets to a point where, you have to decide, am I going to face this another day? And you multiply that all across the nation. Good Democrats, good Republicans who are working in partnership to administer the elections. Will I put my family through this another day? And that's what the far right is banking on, that there's enough of us who step down and say, I can't do this anymore. And as a nation, that is what we cannot have happen. We cannot allow voters to get tired and sick of the Trump lunacy and the lies. We cannot allow voters to think that the disinformation is true. We can't have election workers to say, I can't do this anymore. And that's why it's so important that people stay strong, whether they're your listeners, that they continue to pay attention to what's happening, that they organize, that they make their voices heard. We need elected officials to speak the truth. And we need election workers to just stay at it because American democracy is worth it. And I'm sure betting on American democracy to win the day.
I sure hope you're right. But how do we get more people to vote? Look at in the UK, about 80% of the people vote. In Sweden, about 90% of the people vote. Even in South
Yeah,
America, in places like Brazil, people vote at about 80%. Colorado
yeah.
was one of the leading states at 69%. The average this past time was 64%. So Americans voted 64%. Our friends around the world have much higher percentage. Why? How do we get more people interested, more people to vote? What do we need to do?
Yeah, so make our elections accessible and secure. And there's different ways to look at turnout. How we measure turnout in the state of Colorado is turnout among active voters. And then we look at percentage of eligible voters who are registered and turnout. So Colorado leads the nation in percentage of eligible people registered to vote. We have really gone after hard folks who are harder to register that we know are eligible to get them registered to vote. And actually, our turnout among active voters, so people who are registered as an active voter in the state, we had nearly an 80% turnout among active voters in the 2024 election, with the sixth highest turnout in the nation. In 2020, we had the second highest turnout in the nation, just following Minnesota. I believe it was either 84 or 86% of active voters. And we can always do more. We are always doing more. But at the end of the day, it's making sure there's access. The Colorado election model works. Someone can register to vote online, or of course in person, but some states still do not allow you to register online. They are then mailed a mail ballot, and they can vote that mail ballot, return it to literally over 400 drop boxes, return it through the mail, return it to an in-person voting center, choose to vote in person, and even register and cast a ballot on election day. And then I've spearheaded a lot of reforms, such as guaranteeing access on tribal lands and public universities, parolee re-enfranchisement, automatic voter registration. We've done a host of things to make sure that we're continuing to pull down the barriers. From an election administration point of view, my job is to make sure that every Republican, Democrat, and unaffiliated has access and the security to cast a ballot. But then they also need to be motivated, and that's where political campaigns come in.
A lot of states, well, not a lot, but a few states have let former convicts vote, people who have lost the
Yeah.
right to vote. Is that something you support? Is that something Colorado is going to do?
I support, and we have done it. So the right to vote while on probation has always been recognized. And then in 2019, I worked with state legislator Leslie Herod, and we passed parolee re-enfranchisement. So someone on parole was restored their voting rights. They had served their time. They're re-entering society. And then just this last legislative session, so in 2024, the state legislature actually took a step further to make sure that people in detention centers or jails could adequately cast a ballot. So in Colorado, of course, everybody can get their mail ballot if they're eligible, including to a jail before they go through, a trial. And you can vote as long as you are not serving a felony conviction. So you're waiting trial, you're in detention because you have a misdemeanor, you can't afford the bail. Well, your voting rights didn't dissipate. And previously, you could vote your mail ballot, but the state legislature passed a law that we actually set up voting centers in detention centers and jails. So that went live for the first time in November in the 2024 election. It's the first law in the country that a legislature has passed like that. And we're always looking at ways to make sure that folks who are eligible can make their voice heard in the state of Colorado.
What about the flip side of this? What about, you read a lot in other states about purging the rolls, getting people off the list, narrowing the number of people who are able to vote. Also, I've noticed, I think North Carolina might be a situation like this, where North Carolina's Supreme Court race was, they're trying to kick 70,000 votes out for very minor mistakes. What do you feel about that? And do you think it's appropriate to allow people to correct their ballot if they made a minor mistake?
Absolutely. And we allow that here in the state. And as Secretary of State, I've actually rolled out technology to make it even easier for people to correct minor mistakes. So, for example, say you're a voter in the state of Colorado, you get a mail ballot, and you sign it like you sign your credit card or like a receipt. You just look, and it's not a good signature. You send that in. Well, say when the election judges are comparing signatures, your signature doesn't look like the signature we have on file for you. They're not going to count the ballot, but they're going to contact you. Prior, they would contact you through a letter and say, hey, Richard, you have X amount of days to get this back for us to count your ballot. But in 2020, I rolled out a new program. It's called Text to Cure, where you can still do it the snail mail way on paper, but now you can actually do it using a smartphone. We want eligible people's votes to count. At the end of the day, living in a democracy means there should be fair rules that result in winners and losers. And gamesmanship, trying to suppress the vote, trying to kick out people's votes and to suppress their voices because you do not like the outcome of how they have decided a race is fundamentally un-American. And what's really troubling is it's become more and more and more mainstream since Trump took the national stage. I feel very strongly that not having strong voting rights is a travesty and can backfire. It very much can backfire, even on the people who are trying to game the system for themselves. Let the people decide. Convince people with good ideas. Don't convince people by trying to take away their right to participate in the country's democratic process.
Well, we have seen a lessening of people complaining this time about the election. There really wasn't much. Suddenly, the system must have gotten a lot better because
overnight.
People who complained last time didn't this time. Look, I know there was a major Supreme Court case, United States Supreme Court case that you were involved in. Could you just explain it briefly, what it was about? Because it would have kicked Donald Trump off the ballot.
Yeah. So in September of 2023, 6 voters who were actually Republican and unaffiliated voters filed a lawsuit against me as the chief election officer for the state of Colorado, saying, Secretary Griswold, you must remove Donald Trump from the ballot because he is barred under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, if you look at the words, says that someone who is engaged in insurrection cannot hold office again. That's the gist of that. So it went through litigation. The trial. Trump, by the way, joined the case. So we ended up being both defendants, if you could believe it, both being sued by voters in Colorado.
Never thought that would happen, did you?
Never thought I'd be on the same side of a bee in a lawsuit with that guy. But the trial court found that Trump did engage in insurrection. They held a hearing, decided Trump engaged in insurrection, but said Section 3 didn't apply. That was then appealed to the Colorado Supreme Court, who looked at the facts of the case again and found again that Trump incited insurrection and said that under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, he could not be a candidate on Colorado's ballot. And they did something really smart where they said, Secretary Griswold, Trump is barred, but if there is an active appeal to the United States Supreme Court, just put him on the ballot. Which makes sense, right? A lot of times people can get disqualified after the fact, but you want to make sure that, a candidate is on the ballot in case they are actually eligible.
Now, this is just for the primary, correct? It wasn't for the general.
Yeah, primary.
That's for the primary.
Yeah, this is all the primary.
Right.
So
you would have to put them on in the general, right? There's no state right on that. There's no state jurisdiction on that decision, correct?
Well, you're right, because that's how the Supreme Court decided. The Supreme Court ultimately decided that for federal candidates, Congress has to act before a state can act. But in general, that's not how elections work. And I think it was a major I don't know if it was a misunderstanding or an excuse for the Supreme Court. But during oral arguments, I think Alito was really focused on the idea that what would happen if a candidate was on the ballot in one state and not the other state? Chaos would emerge. That happens every election. Minnesota, for example, they don't check qualifications for candidates. In Colorado, if we know someone's not qualified, we don't put them on the ballot. So there was a candidate for president this last presidential election in the primary that was on the ballot in Minnesota, but not in Colorado because he is not a natural-born U.S. citizen. We kept him off. So,
and look at Bobby Kennedy. He was on some state ballots. He didn't qualify for others. He was on some, not on others.
Yeah. So, I was not surprised by the Supreme Court. I think, unfortunately, we have major corruption issues in the United States Supreme Court right now. So I was not surprised by the decision, but the idea that people who could be found guilty for insurrection, even though there's a clause in the Constitution, can still run and hold office, I think is counter to the clear reading of that amendment. But of course, I as an official, I follow what the Supreme Court says. He was on the ballot. He received 500,000 plus votes in the Republican primary out here. And now he's about to be sworn in as the president of the United States next week.
I want to be very sensitive to your time, so let me just ask you one other question because you raised it. The insurrection laws. It looks like a week from today, he may issue a pardon of all of them. How do you feel about that? And going back to what we just talked about with how people feel about the system and voting and our rights and what is the message that will send to the American people?
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see what he does, because Trump says a lot of things and then doesn't follow through. So TBD on whether he does that. But if he were to do that, it would be a slap in the face to the American justice system. Imagine the seat of democracy was attacked by a violent mob who is trying to stop the peaceful transfer of presidential authority. That's an attack on all of us. It's an attack on the nation. And for the hundreds and hundreds of people who have been found guilty and sentenced, they deserve to face accountability. And to have a president who tried to steal the 2020 election come in and say, nope, I'm going to pardon all these folks, it will be a slap in the face to justice in this country. But I just think, like, you're getting at a really important point. Do people give up hope? Do people give up hope? And I strongly believe that we are going to right the course. The American people are good people. I don't think that Trump's election means that people believe an insurrection is okay. I don't think Trump's election means that people think it's okay to pardon folks who tried to steal or help steal a presidency. I don't think that's what it means. At the end of the day, Republicans, Democrats, and unaffiliateds believe in justice. And I do not think the outcome of the 2024 election means that President Trump will have the American people on his side as he continues to degrade our American democracy and the rule of law in this country.
Well, there's so many other things I want to talk to you about. Campaign reform, money in politics. We could go on for a long time, but I want to be very sensitive to your schedule. So I just want to thank you for being our guest today. I really appreciate it. I hope you'll come back at some point and we could talk about a whole bunch of other issues because there's always plenty to talk to you about. So thank you for being on the show. Colorado's 39th Secretary of State, Jena Griswold. Madam Secretary, stay unconventional.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
You've been listening to Unconventional Times with your host, Richard Gordon. Check out all of the episodes of Unconventional Times on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Richard Gordon and all of his unconventional conversations, head on over to unconventionaltimes.com. Thanks for listening.